If you're wrong, people stay missing. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud no one wanted to acknowledge. Outside the mission command tent, the steady thunder of helicopter rotors rolled across the mountains of western Montana. Search teams had been working for 48 hours. Drones had scanned ridgelines. Satellites had combed through miles of forest. Thermal imaging had turned the wilderness into glowing patterns of data. Yet the missing rescue helicopter remained invisible. Captain Ryan Cole stood before a wall of digital maps, his jaw tight with frustration. Around him, analysts stared at screens filled with terrain models, weather reports, and search grids stretching across nearly 600 square miles. Every minute felt heavier than the last. Every update sounded the same. Nothing found. Nothing confirmed. Nothing. Near the back of the tent stood a man nobody seemed to notice. Ethan Mercer was 82 years old. His faded field jacket looked older than some of the pilots flying outside. His silver hair moved slightly whenever the mountain wind slipped through the open flap of the tent. He said nothing. He simply watched. The younger officers barely spared him a glance. To them, he looked like another retired veteran visiting the base out of curiosity. Captain Cole certainly thought so. His attention remained fixed on the mission. The missing aircraft had disappeared during a routine recovery operation after unexpected weather rolled across the mountains. The emergency beacon had transmitted briefly before going silent. Since then, there had been nothing. No radio contact. No confirmed wreckage. No signal. Only questions. A technician zoomed in on another section of terrain. Dense pine forest covered steep valleys and narrow ridgelines. Shadows stretched across the screen like dark rivers. "We've eliminated another 70 square miles," someone reported. Cole nodded, though the update brought little comfort. Then a quiet voice emerged from behind the crowd. "They're searching the wrong valley." Several heads turned. Ethan remained motionless. His pale blue eyes stayed on the map. The room fell silent for a second before a few people exchanged confused looks. Captain Cole glanced over his shoulder. "Excuse me." Ethan stepped closer. Not hurried. Not uncertain. Just calm. He studied the terrain for less than 5 seconds. Then he pointed toward a cluster of ridges near the eastern edge of the search zone. 41.22, 41.24, 41.27. The coordinates sounded oddly precise. Cole frowned. "What are those?" Ethan never looked away from the map. "Where you'll find them." A few officers smirked. One analyst quietly laughed. Another shook his head. They had weather satellites, flight telemetry, and advanced search software. This old man had spoken 3 numbers. Nothing more. Captain Cole crossed his arms. "And how exactly did you come up with that?" For the first time, Ethan's gaze shifted toward the mountains beyond the tent. Dark clouds drifted across distant peaks. The wind carried the scent of pine and approaching rain. His expression changed ever so slightly, as though he were seeing something nobody else could see. Then he answered with a sentence that made Lieutenant Noah Bennett stop writing and slowly look up from his notebook. "Because I've seen this mountain make pilots choose that valley before." Captain Ryan Cole stared at Ethan Mercer for several long seconds. The hum of computers filled the silence. Somewhere outside, another helicopter lifted off, its rotors sending a deep vibration through the canvas walls of the tent. Finally, Cole let out a short breath and shook his head. That is not how search and rescue works. A few officers nodded immediately. The tension in the room eased as confidence returned to familiar procedures and familiar technology. Ethan did not argue. He simply looked back toward the map. The old veteran seemed completely unaffected by the skepticism surrounding him. That bothered Lieutenant Noah Bennett more than he wanted to admit. Most people would have defended themselves. Most people would have tried to explain. Ethan did neither. He just stood there, calm and patient, as if time moved differently for him. A weather specialist stepped forward and enlarged the forecast overlay. Bands of moisture drifted across the digital terrain model. Wind indicators flashed across the ridgelines. "Current conditions support our existing search pattern," the specialist said. "The probability model still favors the western drainage basin." Captain Cole nodded. "Exactly." Then he looked toward Ethan. "Every system we have disagrees with you." Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the mountain range visible beyond the tent entrance. Thin clouds slid across the peaks like slow-moving ships. "The mountain does not care what your systems think," he said quietly. Several people exchanged amused looks. One analyst rolled his chair back and folded his arms. To them, The statement sounded like something from another era. Noah glanced at Ethan again. There was no frustration in the old man's face. No pride. No attempt to win an argument. Only certainty. That certainty began to bother Noah even more. He turned back toward the map. The coordinates Ethan had given were still displayed on a side monitor. 3 points. 3 locations clustered near the eastern ridge. Noah zoomed in. Dense forest. Steep elevation changes. Narrow valleys. Difficult terrain. The kind of place search planners usually avoided first because of low access and poor visibility. Yet something about the pattern caught his attention. Before he could study it further, Captain Cole dismissed the discussion. "We are staying with the current plan." Officers returned to their stations. Conversations resumed. Keyboards clicked. Radios crackled. The operation moved forward. But Noah noticed something no one else seemed to see. Ethan had shifted his gaze upward. Not toward the map. Toward the sky. The old veteran watched the clouds for several moments. Then he looked toward a distant ridgeline barely visible through the tent opening. His expression changed. Only slightly. Yet Noah felt a strange chill crawl through him. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. The cover was faded. The corners were worn smooth by decades of use. He opened it carefully and studied a page filled with handwritten notes. Then he traced a finger across a rough sketch of mountains drawn many years earlier. Noah could not see the details from where he stood, but he could see the date written across the top of the page. 1969. Lieutenant Noah Bennett waited until nobody was paying attention before moving closer. The activity inside the command tent had returned to normal. Radios carried routine updates. Analysts compared search grids. Officers studied weather projections. Yet Noah could not stop looking at the notebook in Ethan Mercer's hands. The old veteran turned a page carefully, almost respectfully, as though the paper carried something far more valuable than ink. Noah caught a brief glimpse of faded contour lines and handwritten notes running along the margins. The sketches were rough, but they were detailed. Ridgelines, valleys, wind corridors. Small arrows marked routes through terrain that looked remarkably similar to the mountains surrounding them now. "That is an old map," Noah said quietly. Ethan glanced up. "Not a map." His voice remained calm. "A memory." Noah looked down again. The date was still visible near the top corner. 1969. More than half a century ago. The paper itself had yellowed with age. The edges were worn thin, yet every line remained precise. "You drew this?" Noah asked. Ethan nodded once. "A long time ago." Outside, a gust of mountain wind swept across the base. The tent fabric rippled softly. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the sound. Noah noticed it immediately. The old man seemed to pay attention to things everyone else ignored. The direction of the wind. The movement of clouds. The changing light along the ridges. It was as if he were reading a language nobody else could see. "You really think they are in that valley?" Noah asked. Ethan closed the notebook. "I think the pilot made a choice." "Based on what?" "Survival." Noah frowned. Ethan studied the distant mountains for a moment before answering. "People believe terrain is fixed. It is not. Every mountain changes with weather. Wind creates pathways. Fog creates walls. Pilots feel it even when instruments do not explain it." Noah glanced toward the digital displays filling the command center. Millions of dollars in technology surrounded them, yet none of it had produced an answer. Ethan pointed toward the eastern ridgeline visible through the tent opening. "See that cloud shelf?" Noah followed his gaze. A long gray band stretched across the upper slopes. "Yes. It was not there 3 hours ago." Noah looked back at him. "And that matters?" Ethan gave the slightest nod. "More than most people think." Before Noah could ask another question, a sudden burst of static echoed from a nearby radio station. Operators immediately focused on incoming updates. Search helicopters were returning from another sweep. Again, nothing had been found. Captain Ryan Cole rubbed his temples and stared at the mission map. The frustration in the room deepened. 48 hours had become nearly 50. Hope was beginning to thin. Noah looked back toward Ethan. The old veteran had reopened the notebook. This time Noah noticed something hidden near the bottom of the page. 3 small numbers circled in faded pencil. His pulse quickened. They matched the coordinates Ethan had given earlier. Exactly. Noah slowly lifted his eyes from the page. Ethan was already looking at him. Neither man spoke. But for the first time since the operation began, Noah felt absolutely certain of one thing. Ethan Mercer had not guessed. Lieutenant Noah Bennett could not take his eyes off the notebook. The circled coordinates lingered in his mind like an unanswered question. The paper was old. The ink had faded. Yet the numbers were unmistakable. They matched perfectly. Not approximately. Not generally. Exactly. Across the command tent, Captain Ryan Cole was already preparing the next search cycle. A fresh series of flight paths appeared across the digital map. Fuel calculations, visibility estimates, probability zones. The operation continued to move forward with mechanical precision, but Noah felt something shifting beneath the surface. He closed the notebook and handed it back to Ethan. How long ago did you write those coordinates? Ethan slipped the notebook into his jacket without looking down. Long enough. Noah frowned. That is not an answer. A faint smile appeared at the corner of the old veteran's mouth. Sometimes the answer comes before the question. Before Noah could respond, a gust of wind swept through the tent entrance. Several officers glanced toward the weather monitors. Outside, the mountains had changed. The afternoon sun had faded behind a growing layer of clouds. Long shadows stretched across the ridges. Ethan noticed immediately. His eyes followed the movement of the clouds as if he were tracking something invisible. The window was closing, he said quietly. Noah looked up. What window? Ethan pointed toward the eastern range. The one the pilot saw. Meanwhile, Captain Cole received another update. A search helicopter had completed a sweep of the western drainage basin. Again, nothing. No wreckage. No emergency beacon. No sign of the missing crew. The frustration inside the tent deepened. Officers spoke more quietly now. The confidence from earlier was beginning to crack. 49 hours had passed. Every empty report carried more weight than the one before it. Noah looked toward Ethan again. The old veteran seemed oddly calm for someone standing in the middle of a failing recovery effort. You already know where they are, do not you? Noah asked. Ethan took several seconds before answering. No, the response surprised him. Then why are you so certain? Ethan shifted his gaze toward the mountains once more. The fading light reflected softly in his pale blue eyes. Because I know where a pilot would go if he wanted one more chance. Noah felt a chill run through him. There was no arrogance in Ethan's voice. No claim of special knowledge. Only experience. Experience so deep it sounded like instinct. Across the tent, another radio crackled to life. A pilot reported worsening visibility near the western search sector. Several officers immediately began discussing adjustments. Ethan listened for a moment before slowly shaking his head. They are running out of time. Noah followed his gaze toward the eastern ridge. The cloud shelf had thickened. The mountain peaks were disappearing behind gray mist. Then something unexpected happened. One of the senior analysts suddenly stood up from his workstation. He had been reviewing archived terrain data. His face had gone pale. Captain, he said carefully, you need to see this. The senior analyst turned his monitor toward Captain Ryan Cole. The conversations inside the tent faded almost instantly. Rows of terrain data filled the screen. Elevation models. Historical weather records. Archived flight reports stretching back decades. The analyst swallowed hard before speaking. Sir, I found something unusual. Cole stepped closer. What am I looking at? The analyst zoomed in on the eastern sector. These valleys produce a recurring wind funnel effect during seasonal transitions. It is rare, but when specific weather conditions align, aircraft approaching from the west consistently drift toward this corridor. He pointed directly at the cluster of coordinates Ethan Mercer had identified hours earlier. The room grew quiet. How often? Cole asked. Not often enough to be common knowledge, the analyst replied, but often enough that it appears in multiple archived reports. Noah Bennett moved closer. How old are those reports? The analyst hesitated. Some go back more than 50 years. Noah immediately looked toward Ethan. The old veteran remained standing near the tent entrance, watching the clouds gathering over the mountains. The fading afternoon light painted the ridgelines in shades of gray and blue. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and pine through the valley. Captain Cole folded his arms. His confidence had not disappeared, but doubt had finally entered the room. You are telling me these mountains have done this before? Yes, sir. The analyst enlarged another document, including one incident from 1969. Noah felt his pulse quicken. The date matched the notebook. Exactly. For the first time, Captain Cole turned fully toward Ethan Mercer. You were here. It was not a question. Ethan remained silent for several moments. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed faintly across the distant sky. Then he nodded once. A long time ago. Noah watched the room change. The laughter from earlier was gone. The dismissive expressions had vanished. Nobody was looking at Ethan like a curious visitor anymore. They were looking at him like a missing piece of a puzzle they had not realized existed. Cole stepped closer. What happened in 1969? Ethan's gaze drifted toward the mountains. The cloud shelf continued creeping lower along the eastern ridge. A crew disappeared. His voice was calm, steady. The search team spent days looking in the wrong places. The tent became completely silent. And then, Noah asked quietly. Ethan looked back toward the coordinates glowing on the screen. His eyes lingered there as though he were staring through time itself. Someone finally noticed the mountain was making pilots choose the same valley. The words settled over the room like a weight. Outside, the weather continued to deteriorate. Visibility reports were already dropping. Every minute mattered now. Captain Cole looked from the screen to the mountains and back again. For the first time since the operation began, he was no longer arguing with Ethan's conclusion. He was beginning to fear that the old veteran might be right. Captain Ryan Cole stared at the coordinates glowing on the monitor. The tent felt smaller now. The steady rhythm of keyboards and radios had faded into the background. Every person in the room seemed to be waiting for the same decision. Outside, the mountains were disappearing behind a curtain of low clouds. Time was slipping away. Cole looked toward the operations clock mounted above the main display. Nearly 50 hours. Every additional hour reduced the chances of a successful recovery. He knew that. Everyone did. Yet changing the search pattern this late carried its own risk. Resources were limited. Fuel was limited. Daylight was fading. He turned toward the lead flight coordinator. How quickly can we redirect a helicopter to the eastern corridor? The coordinator hesitated. 20 minutes to launch. Maybe less if we pull one aircraft from the western sector. A few officers exchanged nervous looks. That suggestion alone represented a major shift in strategy. For 2 days, the operation had focused almost entirely on the opposite side of the mountain range. Captain Cole remained silent. His eyes drifted toward Ethan Mercer. The old veteran stood exactly where he had been standing all afternoon. Calm, patient, watching the clouds, watching the wind, watching the mountain itself. Noah Bennett noticed something then. Ethan was not studying the mission maps anymore. He was studying the weather. His attention followed the movement of mist along the ridgeline. The old veteran seemed to understand something the computers could not calculate. What are you looking at? Noah asked quietly. Ethan pointed toward a narrow gap between two distant peaks. That opening. Noah squinted. The gap looked insignificant, barely noticeable from the base. What about it? Ethan took a slow breath. The wind changed. Noah listened carefully. Outside, the air carried a low whistle as it moved through the valley. Ethan nodded toward the mountains. The pilot would have felt that. Noah glanced back toward the coordinates. Suddenly, the pieces began fitting together. The weather, the terrain, the old notebook, the archived reports from 1969. None of them proved anything on their own. Together, they formed a pattern. Across the room, the lead analyst cleared his throat. Sir, there is something else. Captain Cole looked up. The analyst enlarged a terrain model. The eastern corridor contains several natural landing zones. The screen highlighted a series of small clearings hidden among dense forest. Most are invisible from standard satellite angles. A hush settled over the tent. Captain Cole stepped closer. How many? 3 significant locations. The analyst zoomed further. Noah felt his pulse accelerate. The highlighted locations aligned almost perfectly with the 3 coordinates Ethan had given. Nobody laughed now. Nobody questioned where the numbers came from. Captain Cole stared at the display for a long moment. Then he reached for the radio handset. The entire room watched. Outside, another gust of mountain wind swept across the base. Ethan Mercer never moved. But for the first time, Noah thought he saw the slightest hint of relief in the old veteran's eyes. Captain Ryan Cole lifted the radio handset slowly. The room had become so quiet that the soft crackle of static sounded unusually loud. Every eye followed him. Every conversation had stopped. Outside, the mountains stood beneath a blanket of deepening gray clouds. The last clean light of afternoon was fading. Eagle 3, Cole said into the radio, his voice steady despite the pressure building around him. Redirect to the eastern corridor. Proceed to the coordinates being uploaded now. A brief pause followed. Then the pilot answered. Copy mission command. Altering course. The transmission ended. Nobody spoke. The decision had been made. One helicopter was now heading toward the very area everyone had dismissed for nearly 2 days. Noah Bennett glanced toward Ethan Mercer. The old veteran remained motionless near the entrance of the tent. He showed no sign of satisfaction, no sign of victory, only the same quiet patience he had carried since arriving. Minutes crawled by. The operations clock seemed to move slower than normal. Analysts monitored the aircraft's progress across the terrain map. A small icon advanced through the mountain range while weather conditions continued to deteriorate. Low clouds pushed deeper into the valleys. Visibility reports dropped. The pilot checked in every few minutes. Crossing the eastern ridge. Entering search sector. Light turbulence. Each update tightened the knot forming inside the command center. Noah found himself staring at the display almost without blinking. The helicopter moved closer and closer to the first coordinate. Still nothing. Then the second. Still nothing. Captain Cole folded his arms and looked toward the screen. Nobody wanted to say it aloud, but doubt had started creeping back into the room. Perhaps the old notebook had been a coincidence. Perhaps the historical reports meant less than they appeared to mean. Perhaps they were all chasing a ghost. Then the radio suddenly crackled. Every head snapped toward the speaker. Mission command. This is Eagle 3. The pilot's voice sounded different. Sharper. More focused. Captain Cole stepped forward immediately. Go ahead. Several seconds passed. Long enough to make everyone uneasy. Then the reply came. We have something. The room froze. Noah felt his pulse jump. Clarify, Cole said. The pilot inhaled audibly before answering. Possible debris field located near a forest clearing. Conducting a closer pass. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away from the radio. Outside, the wind continued whispering across the mountains. Ethan Mercer slowly lifted his eyes toward the eastern horizon. His expression remained unreadable. Another transmission arrived moments later. This time the pilot sounded stunned. Mission command, you need to see this. Captain Cole gripped the edge of the operations table. What did you find? Static briefly interrupted the signal. Then the answer finally came. The clearing is exactly where the coordinates predicted it would be. For several seconds, nobody inside the command tent spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of radio static and the distant rumble of rotor blades echoing through the mountains. Captain Ryan Cole stared at the speaker as though he had misheard the transmission. Say again, Eagle 3. The pilot responded immediately. The clearing matches the uploaded coordinates. We have confirmed wreckage in the area. Conducting a wider visual sweep now. A wave of disbelief rolled through the room. Analysts looked at one another. Officers glanced toward the eastern ridge displayed on the map. The same sector they had ignored for nearly 2 days now contained the first real lead of the entire operation. Noah Bennett slowly turned toward Ethan Mercer. The old veteran remained near the entrance of the tent, watching the mountains beyond the canvas walls. His expression had not changed. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, only quiet focus. It was as though he had been expecting this all along. Another transmission crackled through the radio. Mission command, we are detecting signs of recent activity near the clearing. The room leaned closer. Captain Cole gripped the edge of the operations table. Can you identify the source? A brief pause followed. Then the pilot answered. Negative at this time. Visibility is limited. We are moving into position. Across the tent, multiple analysts began pulling up additional terrain data. Search patterns were rewritten. Flight plans were adjusted. Resources that had been spread across hundreds of square miles suddenly narrowed toward a single corridor. The entire operation had changed direction because of 3 coordinates spoken by a man nobody had taken seriously. Noah watched the transformation unfold around him. Then his attention shifted to a nearby workstation. One of the intelligence specialists had started searching military archives. Curious faces gathered around the screen. What are you looking for? Noah asked. The specialist did not look away from the monitor. Rows of old records appeared. Unit rosters. Historical mission summaries. Flight support documents dating back decades. The specialist entered Ethan Mercer's name into the archive system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a restricted file appeared. The room fell silent again. Several authorization notices covered the screen. The specialist frowned. That is strange. Captain Cole looked over. What is it? The specialist swallowed. Most veterans have standard service records. He pointed toward the display. This one has classification markers attached to missions from multiple decades. Noah felt a chill run through him. More files appeared. More references. More reports. The deeper the search went, the quieter the room became. Outside, the clouds continued drifting across the peaks. Inside, people who had dismissed Ethan Mercer only hours earlier were beginning to realize they knew almost nothing about him. Then the specialist opened a report from long ago. His eyes widened. He leaned forward. "Captain," he said carefully, "I think you need to see who this man really is." The intelligence specialist enlarged the report, and the room immediately grew still. Rows of faded text filled the screen. Mission summaries. Recovery operations. Mountain rescue coordination. Historical flight support records stretching across decades. Captain Ryan Cole stepped closer. Noah Bennett moved beside him. Neither man spoke. At the top of the file, a single designation appeared beneath Ethan Mercer's name. Pathfinder. The specialist swallowed. "I have never seen this before." More records appeared as he opened linked archives. Each one told the same story. Aircraft lost in severe terrain. Crews unable to transmit their position. Recovery teams running out of options. Then, buried inside report after report, the same names surfaced again. Ethan Mercer. Recommended search corridor. Ethan Mercer. Terrain assessment. Ethan Mercer. Recovery route confirmed. Noah stared at the screen. "How many missions are these?" The specialist shook his head slowly. "I stopped counting at 40. A heavy silence settled across the tent. Outside, evening shadows rolled across the mountains. The clouds that had hidden the eastern ridges now glowed faintly beneath the fading light. Another radio transmission crackled through the speaker. Everyone turned instantly. "Mission command, this is Eagle 3. The pilot sounded different now. Lighter. Relieved. "We have confirmed survivors at the site. Recovery teams are moving into position." Nobody cheered. For a moment, nobody even breathed. Then the room erupted into motion. Officers relayed updates. Analysts adjusted logistics. Coordinators redirected resources. Yet amid all the activity, Captain Cole remained frozen in place. His eyes slowly shifted toward Ethan Mercer. The old veteran stood exactly where he had been standing since the beginning. Quiet, unassuming, almost invisible. The same man everyone had dismissed. The same man who had walked into the tent carrying nothing but an old notebook and a memory from another lifetime. Cole took several steps toward him. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Ethan looked out toward the mountains. The last sunlight touched the distant peaks before fading into dusk. Nobody asked. Noah felt something tighten in his chest. The answer was so simple it hurt. The specialist turned the monitor one final time. A commendation dated decades earlier appeared on the screen. The citation described a series of recovery operations in remote mountain terrain. At the bottom was a handwritten note from a commanding officer. The room read it together in silence. Some men learn maps. Others learn machines. Ethan Mercer learned how mountains think. Nobody said a word afterward. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the steady rhythm of helicopter rotors echoed through the valley as recovery teams completed the mission. Inside, respect replaced every ounce of doubt that had existed only hours before. Ethan watched the mountains for a few moments longer. Then he quietly slipped the weathered notebook back into his jacket and turned toward the exit. No speeches, no recognition, no celebration, just a quiet old veteran walking into the evening air. And as the tent flap closed behind him, Noah Bennett finally understood something the computers never could. Experience is not stored in databases. It lives inside the people who earned it. Some maps are printed on paper. The most important ones are carried in memory.